Good morning, everyone. I'm Bob Hornstein, Chief Community Relations and Public Affairs Officer for the Jewish Federation of Greater Portland. I want to welcome all of you on behalf of the Jewish Community Relations Council, the JCRC, the sponsor of today's important and timely webinar. You know, so much has transpired since the horrific atrocities of October 7th, 2023, which turned out to be only the beginning of a multi-front war waged against the state of Israel. Since that time, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis have been weakened. The Assad regime in Syria has fallen. Nuclear sites in Iran have been severely damaged by Israel and the United States. And yet we still do not have a ceasefire deal and release of hostages in Gaza, 20 of whom are believed to be still alive, although God knows what condition they may be in. What will be the ultimate resolution of the situation in Gaza? How will the events of the last 21 months shape the region going forward? Fortunately, we have with us today someone who can help us answer those questions and provide us with in-depth analysis. I know many of you are familiar with Herb Keinon. He's been with us over the years multiple times, and you probably read him regularly in the Jerusalem Post. So Herb is the senior contributing editor and analyst for the Jerusalem Post, writing extensively on diplomacy, politics, and Israeli society. He's been at the paper for 39 years, 20 of those as its diplomatic correspondent, and during this time has covered up close the major stories that have shaped Israel for nearly 4 decades, from the first Intifada to the withdrawal from Gaza, and of course to October 7th and the aftermath. He has traveled extensively with Israel's prime ministers on their trips around the world and has interviewed dozens of Israeli and world politicians, statesmen, and decision makers. In addition, Herb writes a popular monthly quote unquote light column on daily life in Israel. A collection of these columns, French Fries in Pita, was published a few years ago. He lectures widely in Israel and around the world on political and diplomatic developments in the country. He's originally from Denver, Colorado. He has a BA in political science from the University of Colorado, go Buffaloes, and an MA in journalism from the University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana. He's lived in Israel for 42 years, lives in Ma'ale Adumim with his wife, and he has 4 children. Herb, glad to have you again with us, and please take it away.
Thank you, Bob. Thanks for having me. Look, it's not often, I've been in this country for a long time. It's not often we feel like we're living through history. But from June 13th to the 24th, during that Operation Rising Lions, that's exactly what things felt like. I mean, I often wondered what it was like to be here during the 6-day war, what it felt like. And I think that to a certain extent, what it felt like during that period when we were the Iranian operation, kind of gives you a sense of what it was like back then in '67. Even the name that's caught on, the 12-day war, kind of winks to the 6-day war and what we went through there. It's an event. It's an event just like the 6-day war that I think is going to shape Israel and the region for generations. That's what it feels like, right? That we were living through, very historic times. I tell you what else it felt like during that period. It was exhausting. It was exhausting both emotionally and physically. Physically, it was exhausting because of the sirens going off a couple of times of nights. It was kind of tough to get a good night's sleep for 12 days. And emotionally, because of the strain and the concern that everybody felt and carried with them, concern for one's own security and for the security of one's loved ones. Wondering, where the missile is going to land, the next missile that's shot off, where it's going to land. There was something surreal about the whole experience. Like, Israel, they had a warning, intelligence warning that the Iranians were going to fire off missiles, so they would send out a warning to the country, say, you have 10 minutes to get near a safe room, 10 minutes to get near a bomb shelter. Then the siren goes off, and you have a minute and a half to get into the bomb shelter. And then you go into the bomb shelter, and you just wait. And that waiting period is odd. It's extremely odd. I mean, it's like, you know that a bullet has been shot in your direction. You know that a missile has been fired in your direction. You just don't know where it's going to land. If it's going to hit you, it's going to hit your neighbors, it's going to hit somebody else. The whole thing was very surreal. I lived just outside of Yerushalayim, so we didn't have that many sirens. We had some, but not that many. My daughter lived just north of Netanya, and she has a 3-week-old baby and 2 other kids. She didn't have a safe room in her house, so she had to go to the shelter. For her, it was a disaster. Getting up in the middle of the night, a couple times a night, schlepping the kids out. So they ended up coming here, living with us for a while, which itself is also exhausting. I mean, that's the physical aspect of it. The other is the emotional exhaustion, right? I mean, waking up in the morning and hearing the toll of what happened the night before, right? Some 29 people were killed in the Iranian missile attacks. I mean, from a 94-year-old Holocaust survivor to a 3-year-old baby, an 18-year-old soldier and his girlfriend and his mother were killed. They were in their safe room. They took a direct hit in Beersheba. It was emotionally draining day after day, turning on the radio in the morning and dreading to hear the casualty toll from the night before. Remember, right, this is something that unfortunately we have been going through now for almost 21 months. This dread of waking up in the morning and hearing bad news that happened the day before. I mean, we got it this week when another 5 soldiers were killed. We got it yesterday. Another soldier was killed just a few hours ago. There was a terrorist attack in Gush Etzion. Somebody was killed. It takes an emotional toll on you. It's draining. It was interesting because on June 24th, the day that the ceasefire with Iran went into effect, you woke up in the morning and you thought you're gonna turn on the news and hear, well, okay, we have a ceasefire with Iran, and what we were hit with at that time, that morning, was 7 soldiers who were killed in Khan Yunis. And it was just, again, it was a strange feeling. Like you just feel like you can, you could get up, right? You can breathe again after going through 12 days of the missile attacks, and then you get hit again with another blow in the stomach, and it takes a toll. It takes a toll. However, amid all the pain and the devastation caused by the Iranian attacks, Israel did not lose heart, right? It didn't lose heart. The stories of the innocent civilians who were killed in their homes is heart-wrenching. The pictures of the streets that were devastated by these missiles. And again, these are streets that that you've walked on before. You see those pictures on the television. That was gut-wrenching. But Israel didn't lose heart, which is precisely what the Iranians were hoping for, and which is the reason they launched these attacks. The damage caused by the missiles was real and it was painful, but it pales in comparison to the damages that we inflicted upon the Iranian military and the nuclear facilities. Israel relentlessly struck at Iran's nuclear infrastructure, its intelligence capabilities, the key installations of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. It did so with precision, and it did so in an incredible manner. What Israel achieved during those 12 days, I think, was simply jaw-dropping. Beginning with the way it achieved air superiority. Remember, for many years, we've been talking about a potential attack on Iran for decades, for at least 2 decades. And one of the big questions was, well, how are you going to get there? How are you going to fly in? You can't go over Saudi Arabia. You can't go around Saudi Arabia because it's too long. You can't go over Syria because you can't go over Syria. But then that was before everything that happened since October 7th. The fact that Israel was able to open an air corridor, right, and we were able to fly in and out of Tehran as if we were flying over southern Lebanon or Syria itself, was incredible. It was an incredible achievement. The assessments in Israel are that the Iranian nuclear program was set back significantly. Maybe not obliterated or destroyed, but set back significantly. Now, everyone's aware of the debates about, how badly set back it was, how long how long will it take for them to renew it? Those who say that nothing happened, I think, have an interest in kind of diminishing the effect of the whole thing. In this, I think I'm going to go with the Israeli intelligence assessments. And the Israeli intelligence assessments is that the program has been set back a number of years. And not only the nuclear program, but of the 2,500 ballistic missiles Iran was believed to have had before June 13th, they fired off about 550. Another 100 were destroyed on the ground, leaving now about 1,000 left. Between 1.5 to 2/3 of their missile launchers have been destroyed. Now that's important, right? Because you can have all the missiles in the world, but if you can't launch the missiles, it doesn't do you a whole lot of good. Israel spent a lot of energy and with this command of the airspace in going hunting the launchers. Once the missiles were fired, they would go and they would attack those launchers. 30 of the top military commanders from the chief of staff on down were killed. Right? I mean, that's important. That's we saw it in Hezbollah, because when we went to Lebanon last year after the beepers and we went after Hezbollah, they took out the top echelon of the military commanders, and it had a real impact on their ability to wage war against us. Same thing, the thinking is in Iran as well. Also, they took out about a dozen nuclear scientists. I was told these guys are like the equivalent of Iran's Oppenheimers. These are guys who've been involved, many of these guys were involved in the program for 20, 30 years, giving them institutional knowledge along with the scientific knowledge, knowing how everything works and where everything is. The fact that you took them out, right, as well as the physical facilities will have an effect. So if and when they want to rebuild the facilities, it'll be more difficult because they don't have the top scientists that they had before. Now they can get more scientists, but it's not necessarily going to be the same. They were pummeled, right? Iran was pummeled during this period and are no longer on the threshold of weaponizing a bomb. Look, they didn't sit on their hands. In return, they fired, like I said, they fired 550 ballistic missiles at us, 31 of which hit populated areas. Overall, Israel had an interception rate of about 86% of those ballistic missiles, which is an incredible rate. You can't hermetically seal the country, but I think Israel's missile defenses, which it started working on intensively after the Gulf War, the first Gulf War in 1991, it proved itself incredibly effective. The drones, the Iranians fired off 1,000 drones, one of which hit a populated area in Beit Sha'an. That also is an incredible achievement. Israel, even since October 7th, has gone a long way in improving its ability to knock down the drones. And we saw this here where 99% of the drones that they fired at Israel did not reach it into the country. Iran, they launched multiple volleys, gambling that if they fire off a few dozen missiles at a time, in the beginning they were firing 40 to 50 missiles. They were gambling that if they fired that many off, statistically, right, some were going to get through, which did happen, causing loss of life and major, life disruption. But even then, even with the loss of life and in the way that our lives were completely turned upside down, the country did not lose its resolve. Why not? Why not? Because the country understands, I think, in its kishkas, that if it wants to survive in this region, there's no alternative, right? A nuclear-armed Iran is not something that Israel can live with or tolerate. As Prime Minister Netanyahu has said time and time again, Israel cannot allow a regime ideologically and theologically committed to its destruction to acquire the means to carry out their plans. Just can't do it. Israelis understand this. Despite the deep political divisions we have in the country and the personal sacrifices everyone was forced to make during this period, an overwhelming majority of the public backed Netanyahu's decision to go to war with Iran, right? A poll found that 88% of the Jewish public backed the war. And if you factor in the Arab public, it was 73% of the country backed Netanyahu's decision. To get 88% of Israeli Jews to agree on anything in this country, right, is no less a miracle than what Israel was able to do during the war. I think if Israel learned anything from October 7th, It's that if enemies who are ideologically committed to destruction cannot simply be wished away, right? They will act on their ideology. The lesson we learned from October 7th is clear. You have to stop them while you can. The internalization of that lesson, stopping them while you still can, that painful shift in mindset is what this war, this campaign was all about. One thing that stands out, I think, starkly, is the comparison between the colossal failure of October 7th and the tremendous successes of June 13th, right? How could that be? How could the state, the army, the air force, which was so impotent on October 7th, the air force took them hours to get to Be'eri, to kibbutz near Gaza. How could they have performed so spectacularly on June 13th? I think there's a number of explanations for this. I think first it has to do with the element of surprise. Remember, on October 7th, we were surprised. On June 13th, we were the ones who were doing the surprising. And in war, surprise makes all the difference. The second has to do with preparation. We've been preparing for an attack on Iran for 2 decades, right? Meticulously planning it with tremendous intelligence inside Iran. We weren't doing that with Gaza. We didn't consider Gaza to be that significant a threat, right? We were planning for Iran, and we were planning for Hezbollah in Lebanon, which is why we did so well there as well. Hamas just wasn't on our radar screen. We didn't think they would dare to do anything that they did. We didn't have the intelligence. We didn't have the plans. I mean, the attack took place on October 7th. It took us until October 27th to even go into Gaza. Why? Because there wasn't a plan that you could just pull out of the drawer to invade Gaza. But we did have that with Iran, and we were able to implement it with perfection. And the third reason, I think, to explain the huge difference between what happened on the 7th and what happened on June 13th, is that the country has changed significantly since October 7th. The country realizes that it has to go back to a strategy of what it once has, of preempting against threats before they come. Instead of just having passive defense and containment, right? You have to have innovative initiative and preemptive action. For 20 years before October 7th, the country sanctified quiet, right? Israel was doing good. The economy was booming. Our diplomatic relations around the world were blossoming. We didn't want to tip the apple cart, right? We saw what Hamas was doing in Gaza. We saw the fortifications they were building under Gaza. We saw what Hezbollah was doing in Lebanon, that they were building an arsenal of 150,000 missiles. But we were afraid to take action because we were afraid we didn't want to go to war, right? We didn't want to upset the apple cart. I think one of the major lessons we've learned from October 7th is you can't do that and survive. That when you see a threat happening, you have to act. I mean, look what's going on in Lebanon now. We have a ceasefire. But even with the ceasefire, Israel is not willing to turn a blind eye to anything that Hezbollah is doing. So again, those are the reasons, I think, three of the reasons why we did so well this time as opposed to what happened on October 7th. Not only did Israelis not lose heart during this 12-day campaign, but I think they also once again began to believe in themselves, right? We began to believe in our own capabilities. Over the years, I think our self-confidence began to erode when we saw that our enemies were building up to the degree that they were. When we saw that Hezbollah got 150,000 missiles. When we saw what Iran was doing, we started to question whether or not we could do it alone, whether or not we could act alone, whether or not we had the leadership to do it, whether or not we had the will or the fortitude to do it. And I think over that 12-day period in June, we showed ourselves that indeed we did have it. And I think that's important in getting us to regain our confidence. Now, this isn't a call for arrogance or overconfidence. That too can be fatal, as we saw also on October 7th. Overconfidence, we had overconfidence in our deterrence. We thought that Hamas would never do something like this. We had deterred them. We were overconfident in our technological bells and whistles that we built up there. We overconfidence in intelligence we thought that we had in Gaza. All of that helped, that overconfidence all helped pave the way, I think, to the catastrophe that ensued. But a lack of confidence can be just as crippling and dangerous. It's not as if our enemies over the last 2 decades were advancing while we stood on our hands or sat on our hands. Yes, they developed capabilities, but we've also developed incredible capabilities at an even faster rate. We saw that in our ability to develop this defense, this missile defense shield around the country. We've innovated, we've built, we've countered. It's dangerous, like I said, to underestimate our enemies, but it's just as harmful to underestimate yourself. You do that, and you may fail to act in time to minimize a threat before it metastasizes into something a lot bigger. Like I said, one of the reasons that we didn't act is we were kind of fearful of our ability. Can we actually stop these threats from getting bigger? And this, I think, is something to bear in mind also as we go forward with Iran, because we're already hearing voices saying, well, you did what you did, but Iran's just going to rebuild their program. My answer to that is not so fast and not so easy, right? First of all, even the Europeans now have come to realize that Iran's program was not for peaceful nuclear means. Any attempt to rebuild the program will be met with crippling sanctions and worse from the U.S. And even more importantly, right, Israel won't sit back now and just let it happen. The head of the IAEA said a few days ago that Iran could have some centrifuges up and running within a couple of months. But first of all, to that I'll say that some centrifuges are a lot less than the thousands that were working before. And secondly, this is going on the assumption that the world, the US and Israel, do nothing and allow it to happen. And I think that's a faulty assumption. This doesn't mean that Israel's going to go back and fly into Iran every other week if it says, if it sees that they're starting to do something. But there are other ways that you can deal with it diplomatically, covertly, which we've done in the past to a great deal, to keep them from being able to get where they want to be. As opposed to what's happened in the past, again, this time I don't think the U.S. or Israel are going to sit back and just let Iran develop as they see fit. Look, the stated goals of the war were twofold: were to remove Iran's existential threat to Israel. Its existential threat, which was in two planes. The first was the nuclear capacity, and the second was its ballistic capabilities. And the sense in Jerusalem now is that that was achieved, right? These are no longer existential threats, at least not right now. No less important than neutralizing the nuclear thing, the nuclear component, were the missiles, right? Which Iran was trying to develop by the thousands. So that instead of being able to send just 40 or 60 missiles at a time, they could send 1,000 missiles at a time, right? I mean, think about it. If they fired 550 missiles over 12 days and 31 landed and caused the damage it did, imagine if they were sending 1,000 at the time, right? I mean, if Israel's able to knock out 10%, you're sending 1,000 over at a time, you're still going to have 100 get through. That will create the kind of damage that Israel just can't, we can't deal with that. That would be overwhelming, devastating damage. So we're working on two planes. Stop the nuclear development, also stop the ballistic missile development. The supreme irony in all this, the degree to which we did denigrate both capabilities, is that it's all a result of a decision that Hamas head Yahya Sinwar made on October 7th, right? Sinwar believed that the massacre on Simchat Torah would set off a chain of events that would redraw the Middle East map, right? It did, but thank God not in the way that he imagined. Sinwar hoped that October 7th would trigger what he called an earthquake, right? A multi-front war against Israel, mass uprisings in the Arab capitals in support, and the collapse of all normalization efforts between Israel and the moderate Arab states. He believed that the sheer shock value of the operation would galvanize Iran's network of proxies, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the militias in Syria and Iraq, the Houthis in Yemen, to rise in concert and overwhelm the Jewish state. He expected that the Arab street would erupt in solidarity. He thought that the region would shift radically beneath Israel's feet and just swallow the country up, right? But not only did that gamble fail, but it backfired spectacularly. Now, Israelis didn't believe, even after decades of dealing with Hamas and Palestinian terrorism, we didn't really believe that the Hamas truly thought that it could destroy the country, right? That disbelief, that inability to believe that they meant what they said was a failure of our imagination. We paid for it grievously. But Hamas did believe it. Hamas did believe he could destroy Israel. Sinwar spoke of it. Hezbollah, Hamas clerics preached it. Hezbollah was building up an arsenal of missiles in order to bring it about. And Iran methodically created this ring of fire, this proxies, circle of proxies around Israel in order to bring it about, to bring about the destruction of the country. Sinwar, we did a couple of weeks ago, they uncovered a trove in one of the tunnels where Sinwar's brother was headquartered. And they found a letter that Yahya Sinwar, wrote to Hezbollah's Nasrallah on October 7th, apologizing. This was Sinwar apologizing to Nasrallah for not giving him a heads up about what was going to happen on October 7th, because he thought that if he did, the whole plan would be leaked out to the intelligence. But in this letter, entreating Nasrallah to join him, right? To join him because he wrote in there, this would lead to Israel's annihilation, right? They meant it, right? He believed it. What's happened since October 7th, however, is a step-by-step reversal of what Sinwar envisioned and what Iran had been planning for decades. Netanyahu said in the early days of the war that Israel would change the face of the Middle East, and step by step, it really is doing so right now over the last few months. First, Hamas has been decimated. Militarily, most of its leaders are dead, and its arsenal of rockets is nowhere near what it was. Also, its tunnels are slowly being destroyed. Gaza, its stronghold, is being dismantled. It still has guerrilla capabilities, which we saw, unfortunately, this week. But as a terrorist army, able to carry out the type of operation that it did on October 7th, that has largely been decimated. Secondly, Hezbollah, the cornerstone of Iran's ring of fire strategy around Israel, has been completely defanged, so much so that the Lebanese government on the first day of the war on June 13th, they told Hezbollah, don't get involved, don't fire off the rockets in support of Iran and drag us into that. And remember, this was why Iran set up Hezbollah in the first place, so that if Israel would attack Iran, Hezbollah would fire on Israel. The Lebanese government told the Hezbollah not to do so, and amazingly, right, just showing you how things have changed, Hezbollah listened. What we're seeing now is that Lebanon, to a large degree, has regained its independence from Hezbollah, and that opens up all kinds of interesting possibilities going down the line. Syria, which Iran essentially turned into a client state, is a Iranian client state no more, right? Depriving Tehran of the ability to rebuild Hezbollah or turn Syria into a staging ground for attacks against Israel. It's interesting, it's fascinating. Syria was the one Arab state that did not even give lip service in condemning Israel for its attack against Iran. That just shows you the degree to which the new president of Syria hates Iran. And now, you were aware of this talk of a non-aggression pact with Syria. That's stunning. That's a stunning turn of events that's happened again because Israel peeled away the proxies. Started with Hamas, then Hezbollah. When Hezbollah wasn't there, Assad didn't have anybody to protect him or defend him. He fell, and eventually it led to our action in Iran. Israel moved then from going against the tentacles of the octopus to going against the head of the octopus itself. Since October 7th, Netanyahu has shown and preached patience and resolve, and now that persistence has yielded results that everybody once thought was unimaginable. The degree to which the region has now shifted. Israel's strategic situation in the region right now is the best it's been in decades. We look out there and we don't see any existential threat against us right now. What we saw on June 13th was the modern implementation of the Begin Doctrine, right? And we've all heard of the Begin Doctrine, articulated by Menachem Begin after Israel attacked the Iraqi nuclear reactor in 1981. The doctrine was simple. It said, we shall not allow any enemy to develop weapons of mass destruction turned against us. That doctrine was also what Olmert operated on in 2007 when he took out a Syrian nuclear facility. And it's also the doctrine that motored Netanyahu's actions in June. Why now, right? Why now? I mean, we've been talking about this again for nearly 3 decades. Why did Israel act today or last month? Because I think it felt it simply had no choice. Because Iran had lost its proxies, you had an interesting situation, right? Iran had built up its proxies for 3 decades around Israel. This was its strategy. But all of a sudden, that strategy went up in smoke. So it had to shift gears. And if, when it had the proxies, it could kind of slow walk towards getting a nuclear weapon, it could do it slowly, methodically, on its own timetable. It could slowly build up a ballistic missile arsenal to threaten Israel existentially. Once the proxies fell, it had to look for another strategy. So it started to race towards the bomb, and it started to race towards developing, expediting the manufacture of these ballistic missiles. That's why Israel felt it had to act now, because if it didn't act now, within a short time frame, they would either have a bomb or the ballistic missiles, which would have made our situation very dire. Since one tactic designed to bring about Israel's demise failed, the proxy strategy, Iran decided to shift swiftly to another, to race to the nukes and to again expedite its missile production. That's why the country felt it had to act when it did. The time then was of an essence. The Israeli decision to strike then, I think, represents another long-standing principle of Israeli policy, one that actually even predates the state's founding. And that's when Israel genuinely believes that its existence is at stake, it will act, regardless of American opposition, regardless of international opposition, regardless even of the risks. If it feels that its life is on the line, it's going to take action. We saw this even before the state. Ben-Gurion, in 1948, he, against huge opposition from the State Department, he declares the state of Israel because he feels that this is a now or never moment. If I don't do it now, it's never going to happen again. I'm never going to get the chance again. Levi Eshkol, 1967, right? The Egyptians moved forces into Sinai. They kicked the UN observers out. They closed the Straits of Iran. He wants to preempt against the Egyptians. Lyndon Johnson, who's a friend of Israel, tells Eshkol, don't preempt. If you go alone, you're going to stand alone. Eshkol took the decision to go alone because he felt that he had to, because the knife was up against his neck. Begin, the same thing with Iraq in 81, Olmert in 2007, and now with Netanyahu as well. Beyond the tactical impact of the strike on Iran, the message I think it sent, excuse me, beyond beyond the tactical impact, the message to the world, I think, is unmistakable. And the message is that when Israel genuinely believes that security is on the line, it's going to take action, whatever the risks. Excuse me, I'm sorry about the cough. What does this do now for Netanyahu? Right? Where does this leave the prime minister? In one of his early press conferences, Netanyahu was asked whether, as a result of October 7th, he would resign. His answer was telling. Right? He said no. He said no one asked U.S. President Franklin Roosevelt in 1941 after Pearl Harbor whether or not he was going to resign. And it's interesting because when you look at history, when history looks back at Roosevelt's tenure, it doesn't judge him based on the failure to anticipate Pearl Harbor. Rather, views him as the president who successfully led the U.S. through the most brutal war of humanity. Pearl Harbor happened on Roosevelt's watch, but it did not necessarily define his watch. Netanyahu's critics have said that his legacy will forever be stained, blackened by the failure of October 7th, a failure that happened when he was prime minister, and for which he bears a great degree of responsibility, just as Roosevelt bore responsibility for not anticipating Pearl Harbor. The prime minister's critics said that he will be forever known as the prime minister under whose watch the greatest tragedy to beset the Jewish people since the Holocaust took place. Netanyahu begged to differ, and as a result of the campaign that we just saw in Iran, he might be proven right that his legacy will not be October 7th, but rather something else. His poll numbers are up staggeringly. They're up about 20% since June 13th. His legacy, though it will inevitably be intertwined with the trauma of October 7th, I'm not sure as a result of what's going on with Iran is going to be necessarily defined by it. When it comes to Iran, Netanyahu for years viewed himself as a man on a mission. I mean, he's not a religious guy, but I think he even thinks that he was divinely placed in this position to protect Israel from Iran. Now, if that mission is achieved, if Iran's nuclear program is indeed set back in a meaningful and lasting way, then that mission, I think, is going to become his legacy. And all the rest, October 7th, his ongoing legal troubles, the judicial overhaul, the years of division that marked so much of his tenure, I think they will be subsumed to a certain degree under this overarching achievement. I mean, we saw something interesting right after the end of the war. There was talk again of a plea bargain for Netanyahu, right? The idea being, look, Prime Minister Netanyahu, you've accomplished your life goal. Let's do a plea. We drop the charges. The state drops the charges. President Herzog pardons you, and you gracefully bow off of the public stage. That talk was there immediately after the war. It's still out there. We haven't heard much about it lately because now Netanyahu's in Washington talking to Trump. But there is this idea that perhaps now that he has accomplished what for so long was his lifetime goal, he would be willing to leave if there could be a plea bargain to drop the charges, or there'd be some kind of plea bargain arrangement, or again if Herzog would pull a Gerald Ford, who pardoned Nixon and would pardon the prime minister. I mean, this would have a real balming effect on the Israeli political scene, for which Netanyahu is still an incredibly divisive figure. Not only was this a stunning military achievement, but I think getting President Trump to take offensive action against Iran after George Bush, Obama, and Biden would never have even considered it, I think it was an incredible diplomatic achievement as well. Some say it was the most significant Israeli diplomatic achievement since the partition plan getting passed in the UN in 1947, right? Again, huge diplomatic achievement to get Trump to take action against voices, strong voices, in the isolationist voices inside his party, warning him not to do so. Why is this such a big deal? Because it's not the U.S. acting in retaliation for anything, right? It's acting to stop something. I mean, think about it. Most of all, if not all of the U.S. action in the Middle East over the last few decades has been in reaction to something, in retaliation for something, right? George Bush went into Iraq after Iraq went into Kuwait in 1990. Bush, the son, went into Iraq again after 9/11. These were reactive actions. These weren't attempts to preempt something, to prevent something from metastasizing into something much bigger. It wasn't the anticipatory use of force. What we saw with Trump, bombing Fordo and Natanz was the anticipatory use of force, and that was something new. Right? That's a sea change in American policy. I wrote the other day that it was as if the Begin doctrine had come to Washington. Again, a sea change in U.S. strategic posture. It also marked a moment of unprecedented strategic convergence between Washington and Jerusalem. That convergence, however, is not without complications, right? Although I tend to believe that those complications pale in comparison to the significance of what we gained by the U.S. attacks. Israel on June 13th, we acted independently when we launched the strike against Iran, albeit with a clear green light from Washington. But we acted on our own, and that gave us kind of the full freedom to shape the timing, the targets, and the messaging. Once the U.S. became involved, we lost that independence, something that we saw starkly on the last day of the war when the ceasefire went into effect and Iranians fired off a missile and Israel sent the planes to Tehran, and Trump very publicly ordered Israel to recall those planes, to bring those planes back home. Right? Israel wanted to carry out this retaliatory action in order to set new ground rules early, right? In order to show the Iranians that they will not tolerate any violation of the ceasefire. But Trump didn't want this to happen because he had his own considerations, he had his own interests, right? He wanted stability. This shows that our interests in Iran aren't necessarily always going to be tied one to the other. But it's clear, I think, it's clear here to everyone that the benefits of the U.S. involvement, what they did by hitting Fordo and by hitting the nuclear installations, that far outweighed the cost of losing some of our independence afterwards. Now the question is, what happens now, right? Where do we go from here? How is Iran going to impact on Gaza, which has been a main point of discussion in Washington this week between Prime Minister and Trump? Look, there were some who thought that by what we did, the weakening of Iran will weaken Hamas, will maybe even get them to throw in the towel, since they'll realize now that they're totally isolated, they have no allies, no one is coming to their rescue. Although I think those who say that, who believe that, simply don't know Hamas. Hamas is a fanatical, ideological organization fighting for their survival, and they will cling on to Gaza with everything they have. They'll cling on to Gaza to the last Gazan, because if they lose their grip on Gaza, they have nothing. If things are moving, and things seem to have been moving this week towards some kind of ceasefire, I think it's not because Hamas is showing more flexibility because its patron has been weakened, but I think it's because Netanyahu is showing more flexibility. Why? Why is he willing to compromise perhaps on some things in Gaza he wasn't willing to do before? I think there's a couple reasons. First, most obviously, is because Trump is asking him to do so. And like I said, we owe Trump. He owes Trump. I mentioned that getting Trump into the war was a great diplomatic achievement. It's not beyond belief to think that compromising on Gaza, or a willingness to compromise on Gaza beforehand, was one of the conditions in order to get Trump to take action. And in this case, right, Netanyahu could justify that as strategic prioritizing. Neutralizing Iran is more important than getting all of these conditions in Gaza. It's like a chess match, right? Where sometimes you sacrifice your queen in order to save your king. In this case, the king being Iran, being wanting to neutralize Iran, and in order to do that, you're willing to sacrifice perhaps what you would like to see in Gaza. I mean, I heard somebody compare this to Winston Churchill during World War II. Bibi loves the Churchill comparisons. Churchill's main goal in the early days of the war was to get the Americans involved. He wanted to get the Americans into the war, right? He went to there was a summit with Roosevelt in Newfoundland in 1941. They came out with the Atlantic Charter, and in the Atlantic Charter, Churchill, who was a big fan of the empire, who was very attached to the empire, he was willing to give up his imperial designs if that meant getting the U.S. into the war. Historical analogies are not always exact, but I think this, you could make perhaps an analogy here as well. Bibi wanted to get Trump involved in Iran. That was very important. And if, in order to do that, he would have to compromise some of his conditions on Gaza, that I think would be a move that he would be willing to take. He would be willing to take it, but his coalition partners not necessarily so. Right now, he's facing serious problems in his coalition. His far right partners, Ben Gvir and Smotrich, are both threatening to leave the government if an agreement is reached in Washington now that they think allows Hamas to stay in Gaza. This is a real political quandary for him. I think this is one of the reasons it's taken so long this week to come to some kind of agreement because they're working on the types of language that would keep these guys inside the government. And the second reason I think that Netanyahu has shown flexibility is because ending the war in Gaza, now that Iran has been diminished, will open up all kinds of tremendous regional possibilities. Look, I'm not sure, I'm not convinced that there's going to be a normalization pact with Saudi Arabia tomorrow or anytime soon. I think it's interesting because, one of the reasons that we were able to get the Abraham Accords, one of the glue that brought us together in order to do the Abraham Accords was this fear of Iran, right? The UAE, Bahrain, they feared Iran. They wanted us on their side able to stare down Iran. Now with Iran diminished, right, the need for Israel to help deal with Iran is not as great a factor as it once was. So I think the motivation for the Saudis, one of the major motivations I think up until now was again because of the Iranians. That motivation is no longer there. I think they're still interested because what this would do with their relations with the U.S. Also, the technological stuff they can get from Israel and whatnot. But the Iranian element was a key element. I think you're going to see a process of normalization that will start once the Gaza war ends. But it's going to take some time because the Saudis are very sensitive to the public opinion on the street. And now, thanks to Al Jazeera's 24/7 flooding of the Arab airwaves with horrendous pictures from Gaza, the mood inside Saudi Arabia and in other Arab countries as well is not necessarily well. Okay, now let's make a deal with Israel. So again, I think you could see things moving, but I'm not necessarily sure that it's going to happen. It's going to happen all at once. But once Gaza is off the table, there can be movement in that direction, as well as in building a complete new architecture in the Middle East. And what's interesting about that is that this architecture, this new architecture, right, this cooperation with Israel, between Israel and the moderate Arab states, this architecture would replace the architecture that the Iranians spent 20, 30 years and $500 billion trying to build up this arc around Israel, the Shia arc around Israel. That architecture has gone up in smoke, and now we're going to be in the process of building a new architecture. And so if you compare where we were on October 7th and where we are today, right, it's frankly that procession, that process is nothing short of astounding. Bob, let me stop there, and if they have any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Okay. So thank you for that. Oops, I just lost myself. Thank you for that comprehensive overview, and take another drink of water. It's sometimes gets tough when you have a lot to say. So if you have a question, look, we only have a few minutes, so you can use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. I will try to get to a question or two. We have some prepared questions here that I'd like to ask. So first of all, as you know, Netanyahu was just in Washington, D.C., and he himself commented about the declining support for Israel in America. Israel's always been able to count on bipartisan support, and yet recent polls have shown a pretty dramatic decline in support for Israel, especially among younger Democrats who now tend to side to a much greater degree with the Palestinians. And one need only look at the recent mayoral primary in New York, where Zoran Mamdani was the victor. Are Israelis writ large taking notice of what's happening here in terms of support for Israel?
Look, I think in general, they are taking notice. I mean, I think Israelis realize the importance of American support, but I think, look, it's this weird situation because Israelis want to survive in the Middle East, right? We want to survive here. We would like to be loved in America, loved around the world, but I think the main thing is to survive here. And I think there's a realization that in order to survive here, we're going to have to do things that are going to make us not be loved in America. But if it's a choice of surviving or getting good editorials in the U.S. press, I think it's clear where the Israelis are going are going to land on that issue. That being said, right, I don't want to be cavalier about this. This is a serious problem because American support is an important strategic asset for Israel. I think you mentioned the polls. There was interesting in the last I think it was a Pew poll about the Democratic support was that not only was Israel losing support among the youth, but it was also losing support among those 45 and older, where the support is usually pretty strong. So one of the explanations I heard for that was that this had to do with Trump, right? Because Israel is now so tightly connected to Trump, and the two are seen as so tightly connected that if it's a vote against Trump, right? That I am against everything that Trump is for. So if Trump is for Israel, then I'm going to be against Israel. I think that's a certain part of it, right? And so when Trump is no longer in the scene, I think that might filter out a little bit. But Israel, look, Israel's got it's got a lot of work to do in order to to revive or to try to get back some of this bipartisan support. But again, I think we have to have realistic expectations too, because I think a lot of what you're seeing in America, as far as Israel, has to do not so much with Israel, right, as with what's going on in America, right? It's the fissures in America are being played out on Israel, and there's only our capability of healing that, I think, is very limited. So I think we have to have realistic expectations. At the same point, at the same time, there are demographics that Israel can definitely work better and more at than it has done in the past.
Right. So, can you clarify what has actually been happening regarding the alleged shooting of Palestinians by the IDF making their way to these food distribution sites, and just in general, the situation with humanitarian aid? We've been hearing descriptions of portrayals of famine for months now, which really haven't proven out to be the case. But what's your assessment of that?
Look, first of all, I would take all these reports of how many people are getting killed and who's getting killed and who's doing the killing. I would take them with a little bit of grain of salt. I'm not saying that people are not getting killed there, but just because Hamas says that the IDF killed 39 people at a food distribution point doesn't necessarily make it so, right? The IDF isn't randomly killing people at food distribution points. Hamas has an interest in this not working out, right? Why? Because we all know Hamas has hijacked the humanitarian aid. This is what's keeping Hamas in the money. They're selling that aid, and with the money they get from the aid, they're able to recruit new more terrorists. They're paying their salaries and so forth. So they have a real interest in this not working. So I think some of the bedlam that's happening in there is bedlam that's actually being initiated not by Israel but by Hamas. But when it's reported in the press, it's Hamas says or health authorities in Gaza who are Hamas, right? They say that Israel killed so and so people. I would take that with a grain of salt. The humanitarian issue is a huge issue. It's one of the main things now apparently holding up negotiations over the ceasefire, because Israel wants at least some of this aid to continue going through the channel that it has set up now, right? Because only in this way will you be able to allow the population in Gaza to be independent of Hamas. Hamas, obviously, right, has its own interests. It wants to be in control of this aid. So this is one of the main points of contention that apparently is holding up any ceasefire right now.
Right. So recently, Herb, you wrote an analysis in the Jerusalem Post entitled "Violent Jewish Sellers Are a Moral and Strategic Liability." From the outside, again, based on what we read in the media, it appears that Israel only arrests these extremists, which you point out are a fringe minority. But when they attack IDF soldiers, when they go on unfortunate violent rampages through Palestinian villages, the IDF stands by. Seldom are these perpetrators arrested, let alone prosecuted. Is this an accurate picture? Can you share your perspective on that?
Look, I mean, like I wrote in that thing, I think, I mean, the any violence by Jews in Yahweh Shalom, by Jews in the West Bank is morally reprehensible, and the government should be taking more of a stand to stop it. Right? I mean, there's no justification, no ifs, what or buts. It's plain wrong. It's wrong morally, and it's also wrong strategically for Israel. Because again, these incidences are taken and used by those who want to bash us as saying, well, look what the Jews are doing. Look what the settlers are doing to the Palestinians. I'd be careful. I mean, there is settler violence, undeniably, and the government should be taking much stronger steps to deal with it. Undeniably, full stop. But let's also not forget that there's a lot of terrorism going on in the West Bank. Again, none of this justifies anything. But look what happened today in Gush Etzion. Right, a guard was stabbed and murdered in Gush Etzion. The terrorism, we can't. I look at these condemnations from the Europeans against the settler violence, and understandably so, right? But you don't see a similar condemnation by those same countries towards the terrorist violence against the settlers. And there's no population in the world, I think, who comes up more against this terrorism than those Israelis who live in the West Bank. So again, it's bad. It needs to be stopped, but I think it also has to be put in a little proportion. And I think to a certain degree, it's blown out of proportion in order to kind of create this moral equivalency, which I don't think really exists.
What do you know about the proposal from sheiks in Hebron about joining the Abraham Accords and recognizing Israel breaking away from the Palestinian Authority? Which seems almost ludicrous, but
right. Look, I mean, it's a nice idea. It was an idea that came out in the Wall Street Journal, I think, on Sunday or Saturday. It's a fresh idea. The likelihood of it coming to fruition is probably slim. But I think one important thing about it is that it at least opens up a conversation to, well, maybe there are other ideas out there, right? Everybody talks about the two-state solution. It's either going to be a two-state solution or a one-state solution, that it's a binary situation. And nobody's willing to look out of the box, right? Nobody's willing to look out of the box. I think if there's anything important in this proposal, right, is that, well, maybe there are other ideas out there that should be looked at. Then maybe it's a two-state solution right now, not realistic. I mean, you got to understand where the Israeli mentality is right now. The Israelis, after giving Palestinians essentially a mini state in Gaza and seeing how that went, they're not about to turn around in the next few years, or I think in the next generation, and say, okay, it worked so well there, let's do it now in the West Bank. So I think it's well worth looking at other options. Is this a realistic option? Probably not, but maybe it can lead to some kind of thinking outside the box, which I think this, if you want to limit or you want to shrink the conflict, then that's one way to go. Look at different options.
So we have a question from the editor of our Jewish Review online newspaper. Is asking about, obviously, President Trump has influence over Netanyahu, and maybe also vice versa to some extent. How much influence do you think he has with some of the Arab leaders in the region, in particular Syria and Saudi Arabia?
I think he has. I think he has a lot of influence. I mean, the Saudis want things from Trump, right? And they're going to want things from the U.S. They want a security pact with the U.S. They want the ability to develop civilian nuclear energy from the U.S. And I think that gives Trump a degree of leverage over them. And as far as Syria, I mean, there's a lot of leverage he has over Syria, right? Because just
Mhm.
by doing what he did by lifting the sanctions on Syria, that changes things tremendously for Syria. By lifting those sanctions, it changes things, economically for the country to a great deal. So I would not, underestimate the leverage he has on him, or he has on the Arab world. I mean, just as proof of that, look at the degree to which the Arab world is trying to kind of butter him up, right? With a $400 million airplane or $1 trillion pledge of investment in the U.S. economy. I mean, you don't do that to a partner who's a minor partner or a secondary partner. I think the leverage is there, and that he could use the leverage.
And for the last question, I'll leave you with this. Everyone wants to know, do you foresee early elections in Israel Before I think they're slated for next October, I believe. But what's your thought about that? Will the coalition withstand all this pressure it's getting internally?
Look, first of all, I mean, you're right. The elections have to be held October 2026. October 2026 is not that far away, right? Um, and it won't go to October 2026 if it's not brought down earlier than that, right? There will be some party who want to go to the elections saying that I brought down the government on some ideological reason, so he'll bring it down a little earlier, right? So I'd say that at least by the late summer of next year will probably go to elections. Again, that's not that far off, if not beforehand. Although, Netanyahu is, he's proven himself to be a political genius. Again, I mean, if you would have asked me, and I was asked after October 7th, do I think this government would last? Do I think Netanyahu would last? I would have said no, right? I mean, I can't overstate the anger and the frustration that the people felt in this country towards its leaders, towards Netanyahu, towards anybody who was in any position of power on October 7th. And the fact that he was able to survive as long as he has is a testament to his political acumen and his uncanny ability to just keep going, right? To just kind of to all the noise he just puts in the background. He's going ahead. He just ensured that his coalition wouldn't fall, and he kept moving ahead. That being said, I personally think that during the elections or after the elections, you're going to see a changed Israeli political environment, a changed Israeli political landscape. Again, the country is hurting. The country is angry. It's mad at its leaders. It's mad at the discourse that we've had. I mean, you talk to a lot of people, on the street, and they say, we just sweep everybody out. Anybody who had anything to do with October 7th, politically, militarily, just sweep them out. We need a new kind of discourse. We need new leaders. I think that when we do go to new elections, I think you could see some new faces out there who will be talking about a new type of discourse, and that there's a need for compromise in this country, which in the past has kind of been seen as weakness. I'm not going to compromise on values. How can I compromise on my values? I think now people realize how important it is to compromise on values. And I'll just give you, just one example. The whole judicial reform debate. What was that about? What was that about? If you take the extremes on both sides, both those who were for the judicial reform and those who are against the judicial reform, those who were for the judicial reform, it was essentially a question of what is Israel? Is it first a Jewish state or a democratic state? And those on the other extreme who were zealously against it, they're also, what was Israel? First a Jewish state? They said it should first be a democratic state. And those on this side said it should first be a Jewish state. So if that's your value, you can't compromise on that, right? I mean, I'm going to compromise on Israel being a Jewish state? I can't do that. I'm going to compromise on Israel being a democratic state. So what happened? They didn't compromise. The country was at each other's throats before October 7th, right? And then October 7th hit. And I think then people realized if we don't compromise on these issues, then we're really going to be in trouble, right? I mean, there might not be a state. There might not be a Jewish democratic state or democratic Jewish state. There might not be a state. So I think that somebody who's going to, there will be voices with that message in the next election. And I think those voices will do well. I think you could see a realignment after the next election.
Very good. Herb, thank you for sharing your insights with us. We'll look forward to seeing future articles from you in the Jerusalem Post, and we wish you a good evening.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Sorry about the cough.
No problem.